The year is 1150. January. Rural England. You are standing outside a peasant's longhouse in the pre-dawn dark, and your first instinct is pity. The structure in front of you is low, barely taller than a man, with walls of wattle and daub, a roof of thick thatch, and no windows worth the name. Smoke leaks from the ridge. The ground is iron-hard. Your breath hangs in front of your face like a ghost that doesn't want to leave. It is, by any measurement, brutally cold. And then the door opens. The man who steps out is not shivering. He is dressed, layered, specifically, in wool against his skin, linen over that, a thick outer wrap. He moves in with the ease of someone who has worn it every winter of his adult life. He surveys the frost on the field with the expression of a man checking something he already knew about. He is not alarmed. He is not underprepared. He has been ready for this since November. Everything he is going to need to survive the next 3 months is already in place. The food, the warmth, the structure, the knowledge baked into every decision he made in the autumn. He glances briefly at the sky, calculates something you couldn't name, and goes back inside. You are still standing in the cold. Before we continue, subscribe if you want to catch the next video, because in the next one, we are going deep on something that sounds ridiculous until it doesn't: how medieval families survived freezing winter nights, and why the cow was sleeping in the bedroom. That one drops soon. Don't miss it. Here is the thing no one tells you about medieval peasants and winter: they were not surviving it. They were managing it. There is a difference. Survival is reactive. It is panic and improvisation and hoping something holds. Management is anticipatory. It is a system built deliberately, tested across generations, refined by the kind of trial and error that has real consequences. What the man in that longhouse has is a system. A complete, coherent, inherited technology for getting through the cold that covers what he eats, how he sleeps, what his house does to the air around him, and what his own body has been quietly conditioned to do since childhood. We had the same system once. Then we got central heating and forgot every single piece of it. This is what we forgot. Start in November, because that is where the medieval cold year actually begins, not in January when the frost arrives, but in the autumn, when the preparation does. The peasant who is not shivering in January is not lucky. He is the product of a calendar that has been running since Martinmas, November the 11th, when the work of winter begins in earnest. Martinmas is the hinge. It is the point at which the medieval agricultural year pivots from growth to conservation. The animals that cannot be fed through winter are slaughtered on or around this date, not because people are being sentimental about it, but because winter fodder is a finite resource, and carrying an animal you cannot feed is how you end up with a dead animal and no meat in February. The timing is not arbitrary. It is calculated. The meat from the Martinmas slaughter is salted, smoked, or cured, preserved in whatever form the household has mastered, and it becomes the caloric anchor of the next 3 months. The decision was made in November so that January could be survivable. Beyond the slaughter, Martinmas is the cue for a broader transition. Physical activity begins to wind down, not out of laziness but out of deliberate caloric conservation. The body burns more energy in cold, and the food supply has a fixed ceiling. You do not waste what you cannot replace. Work shifts from field labor to indoor craft, mending, weaving, maintenance, tasks that keep the hands occupied without draining the body. The community consolidates physically. Families that might spend the warmer months more loosely arranged begin in winter to press closer together. Shared space becomes shared warmth. This is not an accident. It is a strategy. Now ask yourself, when did you last prepare for winter? Not complain about it. Not buy a slightly warmer coat in a panic when the temperature dropped. Prepare, actually, deliberately in advance. The average modern household in Britain or North America carries approximately 3 days of food in reserve. No cold season calendar. No anticipatory slaughter logic. No physical consolidation. The heating comes on automatically, via infrastructure that assumes gas will flow and electricity will arrive, and the supply chain will continue uninterrupted, indefinitely, without a single thing you have to do in November. The medieval peasants' system assumed the cold would come. Yours assumes it won't matter. One of those assumptions has been tested for 1,000 years. The other one has had a rough few decades. The food deserves its own section, because what medieval peasants ate in winter is one of the most consistently misread parts of the historical record. When modern people picture medieval winter food, they picture misery, gray gruel, stale bread, gnawing hunger. And for the very poor, in the worst years, that picture is not entirely wrong. But for the typical peasant household operating a functioning cold-season food strategy, the reality is considerably more interesting. What they were eating in January was not poverty food. It was engineered fuel, and it was calibrated to the season in ways that our own January diet simply is not. The centerpiece of the medieval winter larder is the preserved meat from the Martinmas slaughter, salt pork, smoked bacon, cured beef where cattle were kept, alongside whatever could be stored from the autumn harvest. Root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, carrots, dried legumes, peas and beans that provide protein through the lean months. Hard cheeses, butter preserved under salt. Ale, and this part matters, ale not as recreation but as a caloric delivery mechanism. A working adult in medieval England could consume a gallon of ale a day in winter. That is not indulgence. That is approximately 1,000 additional calories, plus B vitamins, plus the mild warming effect of alcohol in a body that has been outside in the cold all morning. They were not drinking because they had nothing else to do. They were drinking because it worked. The other thing that gets consistently underestimated is pottage. Pottage is the perpetual pot, the thick, grain and vegetable stew that sits over the hearth in a medieval household for most of the winter, added to and refreshed rather than replaced. The modern instinct is to see it as a symbol of poverty, the thing poor people had to eat because they couldn't afford anything better. But what pottage actually is, in thermal and nutritional terms, is an extremely efficient caloric delivery system for cold weather. Oats, barley, dried peas, root vegetables, fat where available, simmer together into a dense, hot mass that provides sustained energy in a body working hard in the cold. The fat keeps the caloric density high. The heat does immediate work on a cold core temperature. The slow-digesting grains provide hours of energy without a spike and crash. A doctor of sports nutrition, working blind from the ingredients, would probably approve of it. The medieval peasant didn't need a doctor of sports nutrition. He had the winter. The fermented and preserved foods deserve special mention, because they are doing a job that the medieval palate understood but that our modern framing almost always misses. Preserved foods are not just storage solutions. They are biological interventions. Fermented cabbage, salted fish, preserved dairy, cured meat all concentrate caloric value while maintaining or creating nutritional complexity that fresh winter food often can't provide. The preservation process is also, in several cases, producing foods with probiotic properties that support immune function in precisely the season when immune function is most under pressure. Whether the medieval peasant understood this mechanism is beside the point. The empirical result, eat fermented and preserved food in winter, maintain gut health, maintain immune resilience, survive, was baked into the food culture across centuries of observation. We eat the same in January as we eat in July. The same salads. The same tropical fruit flown in from 3 continents. The same foods that make sense in summer and that do nothing in particular for a body trying to regulate its temperature in cold weather. The medieval peasant ate differently in winter because the body needs something different in winter. They were right. We just stopped noticing. Now go back inside the longhouse, because the building itself is doing something you almost certainly haven't given it credit for. Your first impression of a medieval longhouse, low, dark, smoky, shared with animals at one end, is not wrong, exactly. But every feature you are tempted to read as a deficiency is actually a thermal decision. The low ceiling is not poverty architecture. It is physics. Warm air rises. A low ceiling keeps the warm air where the people are. A modern house with high ceilings and open-plan living spaces is, thermally speaking, a disaster. A beautiful, aspirational disaster that requires an enormous heating system running continuously to compensate for the fact that it is designed around aesthetics rather than heat retention. The longhouse ceiling is 6 or 7 feet for a reason, and the reason is that the family sleeping inside it is warm. The thatch is doing more than you think. Modern insulation is measured in R values, resistance to heat transfer, and a well-laid thatch roof performs comparably to modern materials, keeping heat in during winter and heat out during summer. It also breathes, managing moisture in ways that early building materials needed, and it is a locally sourced, indefinitely renewable resource that required no supply chain more complex than a skilled thatcher and a wheat harvest. It is not primitive. It is appropriate. The difference matters. The central hearth, the open fire in the middle of the room rather than a fireplace against the wall, is inefficient by modern standards in one narrow sense. It loses heat in all directions rather than directing it into the room. But the medieval peasant is not trying to heat the room. He is heating the people in it, and a central hearth surrounded by people radiates warmth at 360 degrees onto human bodies. The smoke goes up and out through the thatch and the ridge gap, taking moisture with it and keeping the interior drier than you might expect. The stone or clay base retains heat after the fire banks low. The family does not need the fire to burn all night. They need it to make the space warm enough that the banked embers and the body heat of everyone sleeping in the room will carry them through to morning. The animals at the lower end of the longhouse are doing something that looks like squalor and functions like underfloor heating. A cow produces a substantial and continuous heat output just by existing, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 BTU per hour, depending on the animal. 3 or 4 cattle at one end of a shared structure are raising the ambient temperature of that structure measurably. The smell is real. The warmth is also real. Medieval people did not live with their animals because they hadn't thought of a better option. They lived with them because in a January with no other heat source, the cow is a radiator that feeds itself. We heat the room instead of the body. We heat individual rooms in individual houses with individual heating systems that are each, separately, consuming energy and depending on infrastructure. Every feature we removed from the medieval house in the name of improvement made the remaining system more fragile, not less. We traded resilience for comfort, and we called it progress. But the most underestimated part of the medieval cold system is the one you are carrying with you right now, whether you have trained it or not. Your body. Cold acclimatization is real, measurable, and almost entirely absent from modern life. The human body, exposed to cold regularly over time, undergoes a set of physiological adaptations. Peripheral blood vessels learn to constrict more efficiently to preserve core temperature. Brown adipose tissue, the type of fat that generates heat rather than just storing it, becomes more metabolically active. The shiver response, which is an emergency mechanism, is less frequently needed because the system has developed better preventive responses. These are not mythological benefits. They have been documented in cold-adapted populations and in controlled studies. The medieval peasant, walking outside into a January frost every morning of his life since childhood, has a body that is meaningfully better at being cold than yours is. He has not developed superhuman tolerance. He has simply not removed all the cold from his life, which is what you have done. The seasonal fattening logic is also real, and it is one of the most intelligently obvious things in the entire cold knowledge system. Rural populations in pre-industrial Europe added weight in the autumn, deliberately, through increased consumption of fat-rich and calorie-dense food at harvest time. This is not the same as modern weight fluctuation, which tends to happen accidentally through holiday eating and sedentary winter behavior. This is a managed caloric reserve strategy, the body being loaded with fuel in October so that the deficit months of January and February have something to draw from. The body stores it. The cold burns it. The spring arrives and the cycle resets. Neat, functional, completely invisible to us now because we have continuous access to calories in quantities that make the concept of a seasonal reserve entirely irrelevant. The extension of sleep in winter is a piece of the system that almost no one talks about, partly because it sounds like an excuse and partly because the evidence for it is fascinating and strange. There is a strong historical and biological case that pre-industrial humans slept more in winter, not just longer nights, but a practice sometimes called segmented sleep, in which people slept a first and second sleep with a wakeful period in between. The historian Roger Ekirch has documented this extensively. The point here is not the segmented sleep specifically, but the broader principle. Winter was a season in which the body's energy demands were managed partly by spending more time in a low metabolic rest state. That is intelligent. It is also something we have entirely abolished in favor of artificial light, scheduled work, and the firm insistence that Tuesday in January should be metabolically identical to Tuesday in June. Humoral medicine gets a bad press, and it deserves some of it. The theory that the body's health is governed by 4 fluids in balance was wrong in mechanism and occasionally catastrophic in practice. But the dietary prescriptions that flowed from humoral winter medicine were not always wrong in outcome. The instruction to eat warming foods in winter, fatty, dense, slow digesting, internally heating, arrived at roughly the right answer through entirely the wrong reasoning. The mechanism was mystical. The result was physiologically sound. Sometimes you get to the right place by the wrong road, and the medieval peasant's body arrived in spring, which is the only test that matters. We stopped exposing ourselves to cold. We stopped adapting. We wrap ourselves in the assumption that the heating will handle it, and we have trained our bodies in nothing except comfort, which is the single least transferable skill for the moment the system fails. Let's name the 5 things we replaced, one at a time, because naming them is the only way to see how complete the original system was. Thermal architecture. We replaced low ceilings, central hearths, shared sleeping, and animal cohabitation with high-ceilinged, individually heated, open-plan spaces that require continuous infrastructure to remain habitable. The medieval house needed almost no energy input to retain the heat generated inside it. The modern house is an energy sieve dressed in planning permissions. Cold season nutrition. We replaced the Martinmas food calendar, the deliberate seasonal shift to calorically dense preserved foods, and the intuitive match between winter eating and winter physiology with year-round availability of everything, calibrated to nothing. We are eating summer food in winter and wondering why we're tired in January. There is an entire functional nutritional system that operated here for centuries. We threw it away for avocados in December. Layering strategy. We replaced wool next to skin, moisture-wicking layering, and the body as thermostat approach with the assumption that the room will be warm enough that the clothing doesn't need to do much. This works until the room is not warm enough. Then you are standing in your thin cotton, asking the thermostat if it's broken, which it is. Shared warmth infrastructure. We replaced the communal hearth, the shared sleeping space, and the deliberate use of collective body heat with individual rooms, individual beds, individual heating units, and the cultural conviction that sleeping in proximity to other people is something you only do in emergencies. The emergency is what we used to call Tuesday in January. The anticipatory cold calendar. We replaced an entire cultural system of preparation, the slaughter timing, the food storage logic, the seasonal wind down, the community consolidation, with no preparation model whatsoever. We have a 3-day food buffer and the assumption that the supply chain is permanent. It is not permanent. It is a set of systems that require uninterrupted energy, logistics, and infrastructure, and when those systems fail, we discover that we have nothing behind them. No calendar. No stored reserves. No community structure that knows how to consolidate in the cold. Nothing except the firm conviction that it probably won't come to that. A 72-hour power outage in January would expose every one of these gaps simultaneously. No heating. Inadequate stored food. No cold-adapted physiology to fall back on. Houses designed to lose heat fast. And a population that has successfully outsourced every piece of cold knowledge it ever had to infrastructure it cannot repair, replace, or survive without. The medieval peasant would observe this situation and feel, for the very first time, genuinely sorry for you. He would also feel extremely warm because he is inside, next to a fire, wearing wool, next to a cow. Here is where you are supposed to feel better. Here is where the video is supposed to remind you that we live longer, and that indoor plumbing exists, and that antibiotics have saved 100 million lives that the medieval world lost. All of that is true. None of it is the point. The point is narrower and more uncomfortable than any of that. The point is that medieval peasants had a cold system, a complete, coherent, multi-layered technology for managing winter, and that we did not improve on it. We replaced it with something that works better in every normal condition and fails completely in every abnormal one. We traded robustness for comfort, and we got a very good deal in ordinary years, and we will discover what we gave up the first winter the deal is off. The man who stepped out of the longhouse in January 1150 did not need your sympathy. He was warm. He was fed. His house was doing its job, his body was doing its job, his community was doing its job, and his calendar had been preparing him for this specific month since November. He would look at your smart thermostat, your thin walls, your out-of-season salad, and your single duvet, and he would understand immediately that you are one infrastructure failure away from having no idea what to do. He wore wool. He ate lard. He slept in a pile next to a cow. He made it to spring. Every year. For centuries. You have a smart thermostat and 3 days of pasta. And if this video left you slightly cold, good. Because next time, we are going even further inside. Literally. We are talking about what a medieval winter night actually looked like inside a peasant's home. The sleeping arrangements, the body heat calculations, the reason the cow was not outside, and why the system they built for surviving from dusk to dawn was so effective that calling it primitive should feel like an insult to your own intelligence by the end of it. How medieval families survived freezing winter nights is coming next. Subscribe so you're there when it drops.